welcome everyone to this session on cyber risk and insurance in a smarter world. And thank you for joining. Wherever you are in the world, we hope that you are safe and well. And thanks also to our sponsor, IoT World Smart Cities Day, for hosting us. My name is Danielle Jablansky, and I'm an OT cybersecurity strategist at Nozomi Networks, where we work to fortify and optimize operations across OT, IT, and IoT technologies against cyber threats, but also everyday human and technology errors. If you want to know more about me or Nozomi, please connect with us online. I'm happy to be joined today by Lucian Niemeyer and EJ von Schomburg, two of my colleagues at BCS, which is short for Building Cybersecurity. BCS is a nonprofit aimed at creating a simplified framework and approach to security challenges in industries with operational technology to aid in the implementation of existing and sometimes daunting standards regimes. We're also partnering with insurance companies and rating industries with the goal of reducing risk and exposure to legal and financial challenges arising from cyber incidents. We're going to have 30 to 40 minutes of discussion between the three of us today, followed by about 20 minutes of audience Q&A. Please be sure to use the Q&A feature and not the chat box to submit those questions. And also look out for comments and reminders from our organizers in the chat during the session. Also, our website link will be there, and I'm told there might even be a giveaway, so please check that out. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to EJ for his own introduction, and then Lucian before we kick off on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle, and happy to be here. My name's EJ von Schomburg. I'm the Senior Vice President of Partner Alliances for a company called Red Bison, and we design and deploy internet systems and building control systems for commercial real estate, and cybersecurity and the lack thereof in the commercial real estate has been a passion and really a drive behind what we're doing with building cybersecurity.
So, yeah, and I'm Lucian Niemeyer. First of all, I want to thank Lucian Figueras and the IoT World for setting up this outstanding day of great speakers. I think you've already heard a lot this morning, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute some new content to the discussion, particularly as it relates to the work that BCS is doing. So I'm a former federal official, spent a lot of years in the United States Senate and 4 years as Assistant Secretary of Defense. And then when I came back out of federal service, I realized that we needed to change the world and make it a safer place. So I took over as CEO of the nonprofit Building Cybersecurity. I am thrilled to be able to join here today with Danielle, who I consider one of the rising pioneers and leaders in the cybersecurity industry, and the support of Nozomi Networks behind BCS is really important. So right now, we would like to be able to talk to you about some of the things we're working about, but more importantly is what we see as the emerging landscape for insurance markets, and not just cyber insurance markets, but also property casualty policies. So I'll turn back over to Danielle, hit us with the questions, and definitely look forward to also getting questions from the audience. We feel that it's one thing for us to talk among ourselves, but be able to address some of the concerns and issues that are out there are absolutely important. So feel free, please, to have the questions coming in. Back over to you, Danielle.
Thanks, Lucian. So I think we've established exactly what BCS is, and I'd like to just ask you really quickly, what purpose does it serve, and maybe how BCS fills the gap between building owners and insurance providers?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that question, because it really gets to the core of what we're about. So we identified a need, particularly when I was in the Department of Defense, but also in federal government, that there are parts of, and there are things that the government cannot do when it comes to the cyber protection of all aspects of our society. Many of you may have seen recent announcements and warnings put out by the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency under DHS, under a process called Shields Up, or a warning called Shields Up. And they really do believe, the federal government, it is an increased risk of potential attacks, cyber attacks, across all segments of society, not necessarily just critical infrastructure, posed by some of the events that are happening in Eastern Europe right now. And that just magnifies what we are doing with our society. We are by far the most connected society in the world. We want to be smarter, and that's kind of what I mean by connected, the collaboration and the connectivity of all the smart devices we have in our lives, whether it be in our homes, whether it be in our cars, whether it be in our buildings, cities. Everybody wants to be smarter. And when you're talking about smarter, it boils down to connecting operational technologies. And operational technology could be anything from the thermostat you have on a wall, to the thousands of OT devices in your car, to your smartphone. And the concern is, as we connect these devices, and the millions of new devices being added every minute around the world, we are potentially increasing the risk and the vector of attack for a bad actor. And I'm not just talking a nation state, I'm talking a cyber criminal, cyber hacker, cyber terrorist, to potentially exploit vulnerabilities in those networks in order to create an effect. It could be a ransomware attack. It could be a new concept called Killware, where through a cyber attack from a keyboard, you can actually have an impact on a physical system. And I mean, you can manage controls through a keyboard by coming in through a weakness and potentially create damage. That is really the problem set that BCS is trying to solve. So coming out of the Department of Defense, I realized that we had a bigger calling, and with the help of EJ and Danielle and others, we set up this nonprofit specifically to create the world's first comprehensive framework for the protection of operational technologies. There's a lot of standards out there. Both the US federal government has standards. There are private sector standards put forth by organizations like the International Society of Automation with their technology standard 62443. And nobody knows what all these standards really mean. A lot of folks on this call, on this webinar, probably never even heard of them. Our goal is to take those standards, and we've been working at this for a year, and translate them into an easy set of controls and to bin them by aspirational levels: cyber bronze, cyber silver, cyber gold. And it's not just the technologies that you're going to use in your next robot or in your next vacuum cleaner or your next building, but it's also the performance and the design and integration of those smart controls within a system. And most importantly, the maintenance, the hygiene, the updating patches. And so what BCS has done is taken all the life cycle elements of a piece of smart technology and bin them into what you need to do to protect them. And so that's really at the heart of this nonprofit. And we've done this, and right now we're in the process of testing it. Where we feel there is value in it, long run, is not necessarily with the CISOs and the CIOs of the world. We believe a CEO needs this framework, needs to demonstrate to insurance companies they've taken proactive measures and investments on the front end to protect the systems in their asset. Could be a car, could be a TV, that potentially could hurt somebody or cause property damage. So really, we're looking at the segment of the insurance industry called property and casualty, which is what you have for your homes and what you have for your cars. And we're saying there's a risk there, and we're getting agreement from insurance companies. There is an increased risk from a cyber attack. What can we do to promote investments to mitigate that risk by offering a CEO a reduction on their insurance if they accept and if they invest in the certification with the framework developed by our nonprofit?
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned the dependence factor for our nation, but there's also other nations, right, that have that same dependency across technology and interdependencies across sectors. And I see a future in which, standards become exhaustive and pricey, and that actually cuts out a lot of the smaller to mid-sized organizations that can't compete. And that's a worst case scenario, right? Because you have fewer organizations that become targets and an easier kind of single point of failure across society. So with that, I want to ask EJ, getting into some of the landscape for these organizations with operational technology, how are they implementing, and how could they do a better job to implement more coherent and improved security controls that will actually benefit the insurance industry in the way that Lucian just described?
Yeah, so today, as we got into this, we're taking this crawl, walk, run approach to the framework. And one of the first industry segments we're looking at is commercial real estate. And if you understand how commercial real estate is, it's a really diverse group of folks in the ecosystem. So you have investors that own the building, but typically they don't operate the building. They have third parties like a Cushman or a JLL to operate them. They then consequently hire subcontractors to manage, whether it's the building management system, the access control systems, right? And those vendors then ultimately put in the technology that runs those systems, right? So one of the real key drivers that we're doing for BCS is taking a holistic approach. Everyone in that ecosystem has a real key part in playing in the cybersecurity piece, right? So, and then on the insurance side, there's a huge gap, as Lucian just mentioned, between what was a traditional cyber insurance coverage policy versus a property and casualty. Cyber insurance today is traditionally driven at the organization level. They've never thought through at the asset level, right? Property and casualty, on the other hand, handles a specific asset. So it's how do we start looking at what we're doing, a framework, and offering a better approach for how the insurance industry can really define and calculate and mitigate that risk, right? The whole basis of BCS is risk-based. And we know, like, especially in commercial real estate, an asset owner may own a really high value, a lot of people going in office building, but they also may own a self-storage facility. The level of controls that you need to have in place to secure those things is very different, right? So, we have to be very cognizant of understanding that the risk assessment has to be tied to the cost and the potential or the risk reduction that can be driven out of this, right? As Lucian indicated, our ultimate goal is to drive down that cost. I think that was really key 2 years ago, but with how much the cyber insurance industry has taken on the chin in the last couple of years, I would argue that even today, if you don't implement something like this, you're not going to get coverage at all.
Yeah. The market's definitely hardened. That's something that I've written about in the past. EJ, off the top of your head, can you actually tell people, if they're not familiar, how many standards go into the framework that we're working on building a rating scheme for?
Yeah, so there's in essence two key components. One is, as Lucian mentioned, this ISA 62443, which has been a hardened OT control platform for many, many years, but that was really built for, very high available, very safety oriented systems like oil and gas refineries, right? Really sophisticated cyber control systems go into that system. So that's on the OT side as the baseline. On the IT side, we're actually using something called the 18 safeguards from the CenterNet for Internet Security. So the CenterNet for Internet Security is in essence blended or crosswalked NIST and ISO standards to, if you're familiar with NIST, it's really the Sears catalog, right? It doesn't really help organizations pick and choose what controls make the most sense to implement depending on where you are from a maturity level from a cyber within your organization.
Yeah.
So we've taken this crawl, walk, run approach from the banding. So put in these first controls. Once you get those in, come back, put in another set of controls. So to answer your question, it's really ISA 62443 and CIS, and underneath CIS, we have NIST and ISO.
And that represents hundreds of standards that you could potentially, seek to maintain as you mitigate risk over time, right? They're not going to all be one and done.
That is correct. And the other key part from a CIS, CenterNet for Internet Security, one of the ways they think about what the controls should be and constantly updating is something called attack patterns. They look at data that's come across, over the last couple of years of what have been the prevailing ways the adversaries have been attacking these networks, and do we have the appropriate controls in place to mitigate those type of attacks?
Yep. Can I clarify one thing on that, Danielle, which I think is so important for the audience?
Sure.
So I come from federal government where you have standards. The utility industry has critical infrastructure protection standards. I mean, there are other industries. We're looking at oil and gas, particularly having standards. These standards take years to develop, and in some cases they're lagging. So what we determined within this nonprofit, we would face the private sector, and we would maintain ourselves as a private sector nonprofit in order to be much more responsive to the evolving threats. So, we've been doing this now for a couple of years, working on this framework. And one of the criticisms we get, well, what cyber silver today may not be what cyber silver next year for a asset owner. It could be a building infrastructure. And the answer is yes, that's exactly right. We're not talking about an electricity standard. We're not talking about a fire standard. We're talking about a safety framework to maintain itself as the threat evolves. We can quickly update either the threats and response, or as new technologies come on board from the 10,000 cyber companies that are out there trying to sell the next protection product.
Right.
So we do want to be dynamic. That's exactly what, because the threat's dynamic. We want to be responsive to maintain that level of protection.
And that's really important given that, we know that insurers cannot be de facto regulators, but they do have a 1 year typically kind of turnover term for renewing policies. So that dynamic kind of, flexible model is one that I think the world will benefit from. And you actually anticipated my next question, which is, Lucian, how important is it to have a third party own the implementation and potential certification of controls required to meet these standards instead of recreating a wheel? How do we then help, as a third party, demonstrate the need for these things?
Okay, I got to take you on a journey a little bit that I hopefully I'll answer your question, but I'm going to answer in a way that I think each of us can identify with. So right now, we have checklists, and I think a lot of asset owners are relying on static checklists. Do you do MFA? Yes. Do you do this? And that's really what insurance companies are relying on, are these checklists at the initiation of a policy to determine where they have risk. I mean, in some cases, the insurance company may say, okay, you need to do the following things before we'll insure you. Okay, and the building or the asset owner comes back and says, yeah, I've done those. There's no validation. I mean, there's no performance validation over the life cycle asset. Are you maintaining these? And that's kind of where our work at BCS is in blue water. We are going way beyond just a static list. I'll give you a perfect example. For those of us who've bought a house, when you're looking at homeowners insurance policy, there's a little box you can check. Do you have a home security system? The answer is yes. And next thing, even if you have one or not, okay, but there's nobody checking on you, but you get a reduction in your home insurance. All right. Auto insurers now are looking at, okay, if you put a chip in your car and we can track your driving habits, you'll get a reduction on your car insurance. So there is an emerging understanding that there are certain incentives that insurers can bring ultimately to reduce their risk. Now, what auto insurers are worried about is the typical car these days has, if you can get one, because of the chip shortage, has between 1,500 and 2,000 chips in every car. Any one of those chips can be exploited. Any one of those chips can potentially create an unsafe condition in that car. Now, a lot of them are, control your power seats and your entertainment center. But there are about 15 to 20 microprocessors that are actually enhancing performance, assisting with acceleration, things like that. It's already been proven. There are reports out there that those chips are hackable. They can be exploited. And so what auto insurers say, okay, now we've got this new potential safety risk to a vehicle. How best to address it? There really is nothing out there that it's not like we're talking seatbelts. There's nothing out there to quantify what needs to be done, whether it be a dashboard light that says, hey, you have a data anomaly, you need to pull over, or some type of engineered product that can mitigate that risk. So a third party, is what BCS has established, is coming in and say, okay, we brought together the world's best architects of OT systems. We've been working on this. We want to grow it. We can be that objective body and be very much more flexible with the federal government on identifying what needs to be done in any asset, a car, a home, or a building, and we can maintain that independently. And that is exactly what was called forth in the federal report years ago, Solarian Commission, about having this labeling authority then can serve as an honest broker to look at what has been designed into various control systems for a level of protection that we think we need to ultimately provide safety for society.
And we've seen this push for verification other places across the insurance industry where we have, satellite imagery that's verifying flooding in farm regions when they go to stake a claim. So I think that real-time verification and providing, the evidence to back it up is definitely the future. EJ, my next question for you is a bit of a tough one. So, and Lucian, also began to touch on this, and we often see that some compliance regimes are incongruent with some of the top of mind security concerns that, lag, as Lucian was pointing out, from more of the technical expertise. How can we avoid this mistake in partnering with insurance providers to move the mark on cyber insurance?
Yeah, and I think there's this fundamental gap that takes place today, right? Because cyber insurance is about ones and zeros. It's about identity and financial theft. It's not about the physical harm piece of it, right? So there's this massive gap that the technology has outstripped how traditional cyber insurance. I was with one of the guys and it's like, I wish the cyber insurance industry could move like Apple. They have a new product every year, right? The baseline cyber or insurance platforms haven't changed in 2 decades, right? So the real drive of that is driving the innovation from the products and services that the insurance industry underwriters can offer, right? Because this gap, I would really encourage everyone that's out there is actually an asset owner to try to understand and dig deep into their property and casualty insurance, because over the last couple of years, cyber is not covered within the traditional P&C, right? So if there's a business interruption that takes place at an asset or a factory floor because of a cyber attack, that's not necessarily covered in the current premiums that they have. You typically have to go through adding an additional rider, right? So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
From just closing the gap is really what we're trying to do from an industry on the insurance side.
Yep, especially on
let
the.
Let me drive that home a little bit more, EJ. So what BCS has done, which is different than anybody else, particularly like this, we have access to membership, and folks want and companies want to join us and bring their solutions and bring their architects together and say, look, we've got this product. So we have access to the latest technological advancements. Then we turn into a vendor agnostic control that allows us to then continue to build this model. So for those of you who are listening in, I mean, we do want more membership with BCS to add to that collective expertise to help us continue to refine these set of controls. Because the more we get, the stronger the framework will be. And then there's a lot of companies within who are joined with BCS who see, okay, now that we have an agnostic control, I can then use this to go as an incentive, but not to talk to the CISO about buying my product, but to get the CEO to commit the funds. So it's no longer the CISO jumping up and down saying, hey, we need to invest in this risk mitigation. It's the CEO saying, hey, wait a minute, if I get to this certain level, I get a reduction on my insurance rates or I get insurance. Why not would I want to invest? So it turns the model around towards a C-suite decision at the CEO level and CFO level, why we should be investing, as opposed to the CIO and CISO begging for investments for some of the emerging technologies that are out there that offer really good protections.
So with that, let me maybe flip it back to EJ with another question I had, which is, what can enterprise and boutique insurance firms do to fill the gaps in property and casualty coverage when it comes to cyber incidents, consequences, and coverage, if we've seen this historical gap that takes precedent today?
Yeah, and I would say, one, we would love to have a deeper dive with those guys to really explain how the expertise of the OT systems and the control work and the controls that we put together specifically for the commercial real estate as the first profile, how that can significantly reduce the risk, right? Because, there's one thing to talk about meeting the standards. It's another thing to have a very practical approach of a specific number of controls and what those controls can do. And like Lucian said, we're not going to BCS isn't going to solve the remediation of that. But the ecosystem of players that are part of it all have solutions that fill in those remediations when we find something that will be out of compliance from that control.
Nice. Yeah, and I want folks to understand that are listening in that BCS, again, isn't recreating any standards. They're taking standards that already exist and formulating a way to implement those standards, and then have a rating based on the formulation of implementing those standards that says how well we're doing today and where we have to go, and then how far we've come. And so I thought that was pretty clear to lay out here. So it's not recreating anything new, and it's a third party that is helping folks to implement this. But I do want to zoom out a little bit in my next question for Lucian, which is, in a lot of these conversations, when people aren't really in the weeds on property and casualty, but they know that there's a problem that exists, a quote I wrote in a Guidehouse report said, putting a number on the potential likelihood and impact of cyber incidents is really difficult with limited historical data and awareness of the risk. And so I know it's a really difficult question, but I'm curious, in this ecosystem and in this conversation, what data is most critical for cyber insurers today, or for any insurance today, I guess, against cyber? So in property and casualty or cyber insurance.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It is so difficult to understand trends right now. If you were to ask the cyber insurance industry a year ago, what data we're using versus where they're at right now, their data models are completely out the door. I'm not sure that a lot of folks anticipated the explosion of ransomware attacks in all sectors of our society and what it's driving, because it's such an easy business model. A couple of keystrokes and then a cryptocurrency account, and you can actually start having revenue coming in. I think what you're seeing is a lack of data, and what you see is a cyber insurance market that's struggling to respond, where they've provided insurance policy for which now they realize they have peril. There was a question that came into us early on about is a cyber insurance policy today even worth it? And I would say that that's at risk. If you look at some recent decisions right now that just happened in the last month or two, Lloyd's of London, in anticipation of what might be happening in Eastern Europe, expanded incredibly their war exclusion clause to say any war activities or related activities. Well, how do you define what's a war or related activity? Particularly when we realize that nation states are not going to conduct cyber attacks. There's too much of a footprint there. They're going to turn to dark world third-party entities to carry it out on their behalf. I mean, that's what you've seen, with the recent claims by a hacker group called Anonymous in going after critical Russian national security systems, and particularly their space agency. So you've got these third-party entities out there potentially creating havoc. So you don't necessarily have a trail or data that can say, okay, this is where we see war-related incidents, and even defining what's war-related is in itself, I think, going to spend about 10 years of litigation and a bunch of lawyers. So what you really have is, okay, let's just build out the exclusions to the point where pretty much you're dealing with the same type of warranty you get for aftermarket for your car, where the fine print says basically they won't do anything.
Yeah.
So there won't be any payment. So I think we are in that position right now with the cyber insurance market, where they're actually either trying to build out their exclusions or cancel policies or raise rates by 100%, 200%, both on their initial premium, as well as raising the cost of the deductible to astronomical numbers. So we do see this happening right now. And I'm not so sure we are going to see data that's ultimately going to be able to truly identify what the trends are moving in the future, because we do see the cyber threat quickly evolving. For years, Danielle, this, the big thing is we have to protect our data, our crown jewels of data. Now with SolarWinds, now we have a new threat. We have to protect our access, because what SolarWinds really was a way to get into a network, cloak yourself, look like a privileged user, and with the right credentials, move around the network laterally and create havoc or plant some type of future attack. So we're seeing a constantly evolving threat. We believe at VCS that we will see a further migration, not just from access, but where can we cause the most damage to create the most compelling statement and get the highest ransom. And we believe that's in an OT attack, where you can actually threaten your employees, you can threaten the public, or you can create an environmental disaster, or you can cause other types of significant actions to hurt somebody or cause property damage. Colonial Pipeline, perfect example. There's two reasons why that CEO shut down the pipeline that morning. One was he had the electronic billing had been seized that had connections to smart meters. So he was moving product for free on that Friday morning. He needed to shut that down. But he also had an OT risk. He did not know how far the attackers had gotten into the system to include the connection, the smart connection between the billing system and those meters and valves. So that is the concern we see, is the data is not quite there on catastrophic loss from a cyber attack. And therefore, it's tough for us to say it's not going to happen. I'm very confident that it's going to happen, and we need to be prepared to be able to mitigate that risk, which is exactly what we're trying to do with this framework.
Yeah, and the important caveat there that I think is top of mind is that those crown jewels will be different for every industry and every organization. Yes. And so you need something flexible to meet the needs of the day. So you also anticipated my last question, which I'm actually going to roll into one for both of you. And then we're going to turn to audience Q&A. So these two questions that I had were, what happens if this space does become uninsurable and confusion and extortion persist? And then at a very high level, what can the insurance community be doing right now to prepare for this future? So you can each take a crack at that. I'm going to look at the Q&A and pull out some questions from our audience. We're going to have a poll, and then we'll get to the audience questions.
Yeah, and I'll start with just the risk assessment, right? Anything can be insured at any price, right? So it's really driving, but that price is probably unattainable for folks to pay, right? So it's really marrying what that risk is with the cost of insuring that risk. Right. So, and really driving not based on information that exists from an aggregate perspective of what's happening, but very specific, the risks that are associated within that organization and within that, asset. Right. Because at the end of the day, one of the key drivers that we're doing is creating a cybersecurity culture. Right. If you look, cybersecurity is everyone's issue. right? It's not just about the nation state guys going after the bad actors. It's ensuring that employees don't click on that link because there's a free, $10,000 from the Prince of Nigeria, right? So ensuring that everyone understands what they shouldn't be doing as part of the ecosystem of players within this.
Yeah, I would clarify a little bit. I'm not sure if everything is insurable. In other words, the flood insurance program does have federal backing.
Yep.
And I think that's why insurers are in that space, where they realize at a certain level of catastrophic loss, we can turn to support from the federal government. I think we're going to need to get there with significant cyber attacks, particularly anything that causes mass damage or mass casualties. And we're not there yet. So I think that there's a lot of work to do there. There are a lot of underwriters who realize they have significant risk. They're in court trying to mitigate that risk. I'm not sure. I'd rather pay a cybersecurity company like Nozomi as opposed to paying lawyers. So I think it's really us. It's how do you change the decision matrix to actually work towards investments in security as opposed to coverage, insurance. I mean, at some point, as CEO, if they are looking at us honestly, do I want to continue to pay astronomical rates for cyber insurance and rising rates for P&C, or do I want to take those dollars and actually mitigate the risk? I mean, I think that's what we believe ultimately we're going to get to that decision matrix, and we're going to be in a favorable place to offer the framework as a way to mitigate that risk. And look, we're a nonprofit. Our goal here is to maintain that framework. There'll be other entities out there that will be created to actually do the certifications and offer either subscription or managed services to maintain it for a building, for a portfolio, or for a whole city. I mean, as cities become connected, smart cities become intertwined, and we introduce the next generation of autonomous vehicles, we may need to see a comprehensive effort to maintain a certain cybersecurity level as those OTs are connected to each other.
Yeah, I don't want to see a future in which there's a false dichotomy between either getting insurance or doing cyber defense, right? There's a harmony out there that we're going to strike a balance where the cyber coverage, wherever it is, and insurance is actually bolstered by the defenses that you're taking on and then verified, right? Via third party, hopefully, BCS. So with that, we have a poll that is ready for the audience with a couple of questions. They're very easy to plug into. And I'm going to start kind of collating the questions that have come in so far. So the poll should be up any minute here. Again, very basic questions just to understand where everyone is coming from. We're all at different places along this journey, and we represent different industries, governments, nations, etc. And okay, so the first question that I'm going to ask is related to smart cities, actually, which we is the reason that we're here today. And the first question from the audience is, who would be responsible in managing the cybersecurity of smart cities? And will it be a shared responsibility between the government and the IT contractor? This is a big liability kind of shifting question. So whoever wants to take it, jump in.
Yeah, sure. I can start with that. And that's a huge issue right now. If you look at some of the more progressive smart city initiatives around the country, the local governments are stepping up, particularly with 5G implementation, trying to determine what they need for the difference between sub-6 and millimeter wave, on be able to get to that latency that they want, to be able to move data in a way that's safer for particularly the autonomous vehicle industry. I'm not sure that the cities who are promoting that are working with private vendors. I'm not sure if the questions be determined about who's ultimately going to pay for those protections. I do believe that's where we're going to step in. There are needs for insurance that go even to public infrastructure. We are working with some organizations already that are in the public infrastructure space that do see the need for a blanket of cybersecurity related requirements that then goes into the development of smart cities. So we're kind of in the infancy of this, of asking this questions, what's the best way to do it? We believe it will be a collaboration between the public entity, whether it be a city, a town, or a state, and a private sector, with some support coming in from organizations like ourselves that can offer a framework of what's the best way to do this. We're seeing this with water systems right now. BCS has also now started working with state and local entities for legislative relief implementation on what's the best way to go creating that framework that will guide investments.
Yeah, Great answer, Lucian. I would also say, like, when we look at this from a commercial real estate perspective, at the end of the day, a smart city is made up of smart buildings, right? And one of the risk assessment things that we go through when we're thinking about that asset is the roles and responsibilities that manage and own that asset. So at the end of the day, the asset owner, whether that's the guy that runs the water system, the electrical grid, ultimately has responsibility. But the framework has been developed to ensure that there's a roles and responsibility that get pushed down from the service providers and the technology partners, right? So everyone needs to be included in that. But at the end of the day, it's the ultimate asset owner that has that ultimate responsibility.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is it's a common operating picture and a common vernacular as we're layering technologies on top of legacy systems to make sure that we're in a more, beneficially defensible position.
Yeah, and that's been the frustration, right? Even, guys that like us that have done cybersecurity risk assessments, I may have rated it A to F. Someone else comes in and does it 1 to 10. Another person comes in and does it 100 to 0, right?
Right.
There's no commonality amongst what the real risk is and what that really should look like. And hence the underlying drive of BCS is drive that common language.
Yeah, and a city's visibility for all of the different business operations that happen is only go so far as they're able to enforce a policy, right? That is a standard across all those segments and technologies.
Daniel, let me give you a crude example right now. I mean, we're seeing a lot of major cities adopt the idea of a toll road that has an easy pass only. So in other words, there's really nobody collecting a toll. You just go ahead and connect into an automated process, and that's ultimately how you receive payment, or they read license plates. That is the first step of a smart city, is that creating that automated process that makes it easier for folks to get around. So when I'm talking to toll road developers and recently, and I asked a question, okay, what happens if a cyber hacker comes in and steals the access to EasyPass on a particular morning? So now you've got traffic rolling with no revenue coming in. Who's responsible? And it's pretty incredible how folks have not figured that out yet. In these public-private partnerships, there is no clauses. So if there's a cyber attack, who bears the risk? Who pays the ransom? Is it the public entity? Is the private entity? I mean, who actually is charged with restoring that service, that EasyPass, in a way where revenue starts generating? Who's responsible for revenue recovery on that? So there are still a lot of policies that we need to work out, particularly as we move towards a more automated society in our water systems, in our toll roads, and our rail. What can we do to just mitigate risk for those particular types of attacks?
Yeah, and even if one entity in a city does actually accept that liability, is it enforceable after they've accepted it if we've come into crisis? So we have another interesting audience question that I've actually never heard either of you speak on before, so I'm pretty excited to hear your response. It says the cost of insurance is also associated with liability, which is what we were just talking about. And the question is, while the law in the United States is mainly based on common law, except in a number of states, the prevailing law in Europe is actually based on civil law. How can one address the disharmony and liability between civil and common law? I know it's a big legal question, but it's one I haven't heard your thoughts on, so I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, I'll first of all, it's an amazing question, and yes, we do occasionally have either folks from law firms or from underwriters on the call with us. I'd kind of like to take that question, and we're going to write it down. I don't know who wrote it, but contact us. We put our contact information in the chat. And I'd like to reach out to some of the legal experts we have. We do, believe it or not, our organization is represented and we have access to, for no cost, which is great, to a law firm, Squire Patton Boggs. I would love to forward it to their cybersecurity and common law versus civil law experts for an answer. So whoever asked that question, I'm not going to BS you. I don't know the answer to that one. I'm not sure if AJ does too.
No, I was going to defer to Squire.
But it's a fantastic question because, as you know, you are starting to see a lot of adjudication of settlements in Europe that might have an impact on how the U.S. looks at liability, particularly with some of the carriers and underwriters who have both international exposure and domestic exposure.
Yeah, it's a great question. We also have seen some different kind of interesting legal battles play out in the U.S. and Canada around these issues, where certain cyber coverage was not actually the payout and it came from something else, right? There was an ATM example. The Jeep is another example, the Jeep case. The same person actually asked another question that I really like, and it's one that we are really close to at Nozomi, and it's, what is the role of the Department of Homeland Security in assisting private companies in cybersecurity? And to what sectors or businesses is the department providing financial support? I don't know if we can answer the financial support since none of us actually work at DHS, but Lucian, with your background in government, what's their role? How much can they do? And how much cohesion is being built and is left to be built?
Yeah, the recently established Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, it's only a few years old. I think you're seeing a rapid progression of their mission statement based on the fact that cyber threats rapidly evolving. So in talking to the officials in CISA, they are performing a variety of functions. They're executing over $1 billion in cyber grants right now. They're in the process of writing the rules for that. They are also working through ISACs, information sharing organizations, trying to get the threat data they get out to as many sectors as possible. They are also working with the National Security Council on what can be done with controls with private sector coordination. As you know, DISA recently had a series of engagements and White House events with the Microsofts, with some of the other, other major IT providers to try to collaborate on a comprehensive protection system. So you are seeing DISA expand their role. They've gotten a lot more funding. I think they are still trying to find their sweet spot. There is a series of executive orders related to zero trust architecture, for which CISA has been given the lead on, as far as being able to implement. And yet, I mentioned earlier, I've been in the public sector for most of my life. I just don't know if the public sector is going to have the resources and the speed to be relevant as the cyber threat evolves. So that's kind of where I think they do need to enhance collaboration with the private sector, and they've done that. I don't know if you all maybe read, folks on this call, read about the recent collaboration between Microsoft and the National Security Council in the first days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where there was an understanding that there were cyber attacks happening out there, and the National Security Council called Microsoft direct and say, help us patch these vulnerabilities we've just seen in the last 24 hours. So you do have an unprecedented collaboration between companies that even goes past, what Ford Motor Company did during World War II, where we have real-time collaboration between federal agencies and major technology companies that can quickly respond and patch and defend against the emergence of spontaneous cyber attacks coming into all aspects of our society. So I do see the role for increased collaboration between the public sector and private sector, to include the role of BCS. Great.
So far in our poll, we have 50-50 on folks looking for ways to bolster their cybersecurity in accordance with their insurance policies. And we have 68% of respondents that find it actually difficult to understand where cyber incidents might have an impact on other insurance policy coverage areas. So with that, we're going to open our last question. And I want to turn back and if we could scope in, we have a couple technical questions, but we actually have one on, could we better define what OT is, which is really difficult across the board. So if you want to take a crack at, defining operational technology again, and those cyber physical processes that we're zeroing in on.
Okay, so let me give you a perfect example that might solve the poll question a little bit. So I briefed an organization called the Multifamily Housing Association. So any kind of apartment building, condo, any type of multifamily dwelling, which has shared risk among its tenants, that's unique from having your own private residence. So I briefed them, and as I'm talking to the audience, I said, okay, here's what you're going to see that might impact your life in a matter of minutes. And that would be the same type of notice that Colonial Pipeline got on an early morning, and it comes into the building owner, the building operator, or it comes into the or a facility manager. It's okay. We have infiltrated your systems in your building, and we have seized your elevators, and we've seized your fire controls, and we seized the cipher locks, and we basically and seized the HVAC, and we want a $4 million ransom before we will give this back to you. Okay, so what does a building owner do? Because those elevators, most folks now, we walk into a building, it's the front desk that controls the elevator. It's not the person anymore. And so what's the first reaction? The first reaction is, okay, do I evacuate the building? Is this real? Is this happening? The concern is, and the awareness is, yes, it can happen. It can happen today. And then the next question is, okay, if it's happening, do they actually have control? How do you check that? More importantly, what do you tell your tenants or your occupants in that building? Do we need to clear the building? Do I have an unsafe condition? Think about the liability just in the matter of the first minutes from an attack like that. What a building owner or operator has to make a decision on. Who do I call? Do I call the FBI? Or will that trigger, some type of event? So this is the type of real life thing that can happen, and in some cases has happened. There are many documented cases of successful attacks upon operational technologies, and the question is, what do you do about it? And also even more questions like, okay, what happens to the value of that asset once there's an attack? Will anybody ever want to live in the building again? Or will you have everybody moving out? How do you handle that? So there are, when we talk about, well, I'm not sure how it can impact my life and attack the operation technology. Think about the baby monitors you have on your phone, or the cameras you have that are checking up on your dog, or the way you can control your lights in your house, or you can control your garage door openers. Now you can control your front door locks from your smartphone, or your heating and air conditioning. And think about if somebody were to get into that and then can actually exploit that through your smartphone. These are the types of scenarios that we know exist. And the question is, what can you do to protect yourself from those? And that's really what we're trying to do across a full range of these OT devices. I mean, there was an article just a few weeks ago. I don't know if folks on the call may have a automated vacuum cleaner, a broom, and how that creates a risk, because that broom the data within that room can be manipulated to create a listening device. And the folks who don't even know that their vacuum cleaner may be listening to them. So there are many ways for which a exploitation or attack could have a personal impact, in addition to the lights that's going out or the water being contaminated. We've had a series of attacks this last year on water systems around the country where they tried to adjust levels to make the water unsafe for drinking. So these are the kind of the real world impacts that we are living with every day, that ultimately we need a framework to be able to mitigate risk and address.
Yeah, and in the broadest sense, Danielle, OT systems are anything that a hardware or software platform drive a physical action. So a physical machine, lights on, right? But one of the key points of what we've tried to do from a BCS perspective is the harmonizing. As you get more intelligent devices on what traditionally has been OT, there's a blending of IT and OT. Right. So you really have to look at it from a holistic perspective, right? The handoff between an OT system and an IT system today is so blurred. You have to look at the cybersecurity in a holistic view at that asset level.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the big picture OT question, which I've had to answer it many times, and it's really difficult. So thanks, guys. I have two technical questions. I'm going to put them both out there and you can jump in as you see fit. So one is on the application side from the audience, any information on aggregate information and risk around APIs. There are a lot of articles out there that say these are the top, risks with connecting APIs. Some of them are secure, some of them are insecure. We've got some cloud issues. The other question is around devices, and it's, is it highly likely that, or it is highly likely, according to this person, that quantum technology will soon deliver a new paradigm of cyber encryption? Can true cyber security be achieved without quantum level solutions? Is this part of the higher strategic planning? So that goes into some of the links that a key can be stored on a device at the OT level. So go ahead.
You want me to take the first shot, Lucian?
Sure thing, EJ.
Yeah, so from the quantum side, I would say when we look at the market segments, especially in operational technology, most of the operational technology for these assets stay in for 20 years. Right. So we have to look both back and forward for the technology. And one of the keys of what we're driving from the controls is countervailing measures, right? So if the technology itself can't do it, what are the overlays and things you can do to remediate that risk or mitigate that risk, right? So I think absolutely the smarter technology coming out will help us. And I would say even inside the OT devices, right? One of the huge issues we have from even looking at the vulnerabilities, these things called pen test or penetration testing, traditionally, you cannot do that on OT systems because they fail, right? You'll break them. So we're getting much smarter as an industry of getting and driving that technology into these things where that will only enhance the cybersecurity piece of it.
Yeah, let me jump on that because I think I know exactly where the author is going. And look, quantum engineering presents an entirely new dilemma. It will render encryption useless. It will render protection of digital keys useless. And so, and yes, we have to come up with other ways then to protect those devices. And it could be incorporating quantum engineering as a counter. So there's a constantly evolving, real-time evolving, and it's difficult for one person's quantum engineering computer to keep up with the other person's quantum engineering computer. So you're right. That presents a definite dilemma for the entire world of OT, particularly in the world of encryption. The plan is, as BCS evolves its framework, we have the flexibility as new technologies come in that can counter that. We can quickly incorporate that into our levels of protection.
Yeah, and so another interesting question is on the prioritization front, which we struggle with internationally, we struggle with nationally, we struggle with in states, and especially we'll struggle with in smart cities. So how do we begin with all of the different scenarios, Lucian, that you kind of outlined in terms of home user devices, all the way up to some of the commercial real estate devices that are interconnected to the front desk and to the building management systems? How do we begin to prioritize, from a technology standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, or even from an industry vertical standpoint? You mentioned water, we've mentioned transportation. It gets really big really fast and it's convoluted. So I'd love to hear both your thoughts on how we begin to prioritize these problems based on the threats that we know to be true and some of the challenges going forward.
You want me to go, EJ, you want to go first? You want me to hit that?
Well, you hit it and then I'll follow up.
Okay, life, safety, health. We got to start looking at the priorities that can kill somebody. And so, yes, we do have on our, as a growth strategy with the BCS, healthcare, operating room equipment. The attacks that will provide the most compelling case for someone wanting to avoid it, which is exactly what ransomware attacks are doing. So we really do prioritize within our framework those control sets we need to protect life, safety, and health. The second step is business disruption, which is pretty important. And the framework does have a series of priorities, but by far, our goal is we have a human safety framework we're developing, and it's across all levels of technologies, the next generation of robotics, automated processes. We have to concentrate on engineering protections for life, safety, health. EJ, anything to add?
Yeah, and I would say just when you start looking at the risk assessments, right? One of the first things from an assessment perspective is an asset inventory. Like, know what's in the systems or in the OT side and the IT side, right? So that's one thing. Just you can't protect what you can't see, and most of the industry, especially on the commercial real estate, don't even know all of the assets that are within their domain. So that's the first thing. The second thing is who's touching them from a service provider perspective. So do you understand the whole ecosystem of players that's a part of your organization, whether you're a city, a building, an enterprise that actually has access in or shouldn't have access in, right? And then, think about this from the people, processes, and technologies, right? Have you put together just the fundamental training for cybersecurity for your employees, right? Companies like Ningio and others do some great things around just getting people educated on the very simple things from a phishing and from a ransomware, to start that culture to be created, right? And then, ultimately this risk assessment, look at every single system you have from a zone and conduit or a segmentation and start thinking about the consequences that what happens if one of those went down. I mean, we did an interesting exercise with one and they're like, oh no, we're all set up because we have email lists set up if something happens. And we turn and say, well, what if email was compromised? How are you going to get a hold of folks? They're like, oh my God, we never thought of as second lines of communications if that goes down. So it's taking this broad look from the top down and then driving it from the bottom up.
Yeah, I think it's important.
So let me give a quick example of one thing EJ mentioned. You talked about a training system. Okay, you can ask the basic question, do you have a training system in place? All right, but the next level is, okay, are you tracking the progress of that training system? How many employees are trained? The next level is, okay, are you actually grading, to how proficient the folks you've trained actually are? So that's kind of in a nutshell the aspirational model you have set up. It's not just to say a yes, no. but to be much more qualitative in your assessment, and then to provide those qualitative results back to the insurance company and say, okay, here's everything they're working on and are going to continue to working on. And by the way, if they fall behind in the certification, they get a lower rating. So the goal is not just to be able to get more qualitative, more in depth, but to reward that, maintaining that depth through the entire life cycle of the insurance policy and of the asset.
Yeah, so there needs to be a future in which you can verify the integrity of your responses to what you
Yes.
have in place.
Validate it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and EJ, you brought up something interesting on the access side, which I always point out. Nozomi is pretty well versed in asset inventory, right? It's a big part of what we do. And we mean access both in machine-to-machine communications, which accesses traveling and interconnected devices, and credential access. And I think sometimes we lump those together, and it's important to talk about both. The last question, we do have a rate this session poll that just popped up, so please do that for our gracious hosts and organizers. The last question kind of changes direction a little bit. It's a privacy question, and so we've got about 4 minutes here to wrap up. Aside from privacy laws, what is the assurance of users that personal information is not collected in the smart city setup?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I saw that come in, and I was trying to figure out an answer. I don't know. I mean, privacy obviously in this country matters a lot. And as you know, privacy has been an issue for decades, as far as the release of data. I'm not so sure that that issue has really been addressed when it comes to smart cities, and will create more of a threat. I just, by my background and expertise, feel like I think it will prevent potentially creating more of a threat for personal data, and that's something we need to address. I would like to make some parting comments too, but EJ, I'll turn it over to you real quick.
Yeah, I would say in that particular area, there's a ton of work now being at the municipal or state level from what I'd say the stick, not the carrot, right?
Yeah.
The cost of those records being, released causes significant penalties back to those enterprise organizations.
Yeah. That's happening now. Hey, so Danielle, do you mind if I wrap up real quick?
Leave me 30 seconds and you're good to go.
Okay, great. So as a wrap up, there was a great question early on about whether we're working in Canada. We are a global framework. We are not a U.S. framework. So if anybody on this call is calling in from Europe or Asia or Canada, please get a hold of us. We are a global nonprofit. And so it is important for us to working with our ISA to ensure that. Also, for those on the call who think we're onto something, join us. I put my email in the chat, and also the website. Come involved. We are a nonprofit made up of volunteers. If you feel like we're doing the right thing for your kids and grandkids, join us. Get involved with BCS. Bring your expertise. Help us grow the framework. That's really the most important thing I can leave is we are on a mission right now to really enhance human safety. We do need all hands who are interested to be able to contribute.
And with that, I'd actually love for us to, in parting, let everyone know that we actually will have a full day of topical sessions where we drive an hour on any of these specifics that we've kind of touched on really briefly today with additional experts. And so, Lucian, if you could just give maybe the top 5, EJ as well, top 5 or 6 topics we hope to cover in those sessions that really drill into what we're about, that'd be great for the rest of the time we have.
Yeah, I can take a run at that. So first of all, obviously, we're going to have a lawyer on the line who can answer some of the legal questions. So we're going to have some of the top legal experts in the cybersecurity arena. We also are going to bring in some underwriters who can talk to us about the response, what they think, how this framework can be effective. We're going to bring in some companies that also think why they've invested in BCS, why they think it's the right way to go. And maybe even some folks in the architectural engineering industry who are building this environment. Yep. So maybe the architects from the outside of some of these systems who see the desire and need to want to build into this framework. So we really it's the goals with this session is to continue to raise awareness, but grow the framework into other critical areas that we have targeted.
Great. Okay, with that, please stay tuned for when we announce that day that BCS will have a full day of obviously really insightful panels. And also please stick around for the last session of today's conference online, Securing Smart Cities with IoT World Day. Yep. Thanks y'all for joining, and we hope to see you involved in BCS in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks guys, good to see you.
All the best.